Where does Oregon stand with the 2024 recruiting class as spring recruiting ramps up? We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more on today's episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How's everybody doing? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast. Just in case you're new here or it's your first time listening or watching the show, I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks over on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. Really excited to have you guys along for today's episode, whether you're tuned in on the podcasting app of your choice or on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. We're just happy that you're here and you're taking some time out of your day to talk some Duck football, more specifically, some Duck recruiting with us. Important reminder, if you're not already locked in with me on all the social media platforms, I'm at mtorresports on Twitter and Instagram. That's how you can find the fastest updates from me talking about Oregon football and Oregon football recruiting. So what are we doing in today's episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast? We are doing an Oregon recruiting hour. It is more or less a recurring segment that I've really enjoyed bringing to this show, the Ducks Dish Podcast. It's a kind of a segment where we just kind of dive into all things Oregon football recruiting. Obviously I talked to a lot of guys in the 2024 classes and beyond, but today we're going to be focusing on kind of where Oregon stands with the 2024 recruiting class as spring visits ramp up. So I'm going to go ahead and start off talking about kind of some broad strokes things, some, just basic big picture things for Oregon. And then I have a number of guys that I talked to recently. So I'm going to hone in on some specific player updates as well. So if you guys are watching on YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know how you're feeling about Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks recruiting in the class of 2024. Also hosted, some transfer portal targets, namely Gary Bryant Jr., the former USC wide receiver, was on campus this past weekend. I'm doing some digging to try to see where Oregon stands there, heading into his, I believe, final visit to Texas A&M before making a decision later this month. I think when we're looking at spring recruiting, the biggest thing that we want to start with, the conversation with recruiting should start with, where does Oregon stand with the quarterback position? That's the most important position for any class, any team. That's just how it goes. We have a number of names that we've I believe that we can kind of separate from the pack as far as, priority guys that Oregon is looking at right now. The conversation can start with Dylan Raiola, the pinnacle quarterback out of Phoenix. He's a number one player on most recruiting services. And kind of what we know right now is that he is scheduled to take a visit to Oregon for the spring game on April 29th. And then I wouldn't be surprised if he competed in the Elite 11 the next day in the Eugene regional. That's going to be held on April 30th. So Dylan Raiola is coming to Oregon. But I don't really think that Oregon is necessarily a major player in that recruitment right now because he's taken visits everywhere else but Oregon so far recently. He's gone to Nebraska a bunch of times. That's where his father played. He's gone to Georgia a number of times and has gone to USC a number of times. USC does appear to have the recruiting momentum there with Dylan Raiola, although it's not over until it's over. I just don't think that Oregon fans should get too hung up on Dylan Raiola early in the process. But, he gets out to Oregon, has some good conversations with Will Stein and Dan Lanning. Maybe they're able to shake that recruitment up and become a major player there. But it's good that they're, heavily involved at the very least as of right now in that recruitment for Dylan Raiola. Another guy that you have to look at is Luke Moga out of Phoenix as well, Sunny Slope High School. He is kind of looking like he's one of the guys that Will Stein is focusing on here in the 2024 class. He spoke really highly of Oregon when he took his first visit out to Eugene earlier on in the calendar year. I have a visit interview over on ducksdigest.com with Moga if you guys want to check that out. But it looks like there's some chatter that he's going to make his way back out to Eugene in the spring. So he's a guy to keep an eye on for sure. I think he has some pretty good ball skills, some good arm talent, and he's really, really fast. He's a guy who's also actively involved in track and field, and he's got some burners. I think one thing that's important to consider when you're looking at Oregon's quarterback targets is that this isn't as deep of a class. The 2024 quarterback class is not as deep as the 2023 class was. I think a perfect example is how Oregon was able to lose Dante Moore and then go out and pick up an Elite 11 caliber quarterback in Austin Novosad, flip him from Baylor late in the 2022 cycle. I just don't think that there's as much depth in this 2024 class as there was in that 2023 class. But Luke Moga is a name that we gotta keep our eye on, and it looks like it's things are going well. He just really took off a ton of offers early on this year after Oregon offered, or was in the mix offering. And that's kind of how it works sometimes. Some schools wait for other schools to offer, and then things can kind of take off there. But the real name that I want to focus on is probably Michael Van Buren, the St. Francis Academy quarterback out of Baltimore, Maryland. It looks like Oregon does have a pretty realistic shot with him. Some St. Francis players were just on campus this past weekend. Most notably, I'm going to try to pronounce this the best I can. 2024 cornerback Ife Obadegwu out of St. Francis. He has Oregon in his top 7. He's a top corner in the country. So that's another guy to keep an eye on. But Michael Van Buren looks like he's kind of one of those top tier options that is more realistic for Oregon because they are doing more work in the DMV of late. And he has gone to Oregon multiple times, has good interest in the Ducks, has Oregon as a top school among his finalists. I'm actually going to try to look it up so I can see what other finalists we have for Michael Van Buren as it stands right now. Let's see. So Michael Van Buren is working from, give me a second here. Michael Van Buren is working from, my gosh, come on. All right, there we go. Michael Van Buren is working from a top 8 of Penn State, Miami, Oklahoma, Oregon, Maryland, Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, and Cincinnati. So Oregon is in the thick of it. I think that Penn State is probably the main competition here for Michael Van Buren, or maybe even in-state Maryland with Mike Loxley over there as the head coach. I think that he's going to try to make sure that they stay a competitor in this recruitment for Michael Van Buren, seeing that he's a top in-state guy. But Oregon's going to do what they can to shake that thing up and stay in the mix. They've stayed involved heavily with Van Buren. He's been on campus out to Eugene for a semi-recent visit. I want to say he was there in February. So that's good for Oregon to get him back on campus. And you just want to keep getting guys on campus as much as you can. So that's another big guy that you've got to keep an eye on if you're looking at Oregon quarterback targets in the 2024 class. The other guy that I want to mention, as we're kind of just looking at the quarterback picture for Oregon, is Will Hammond out of Hutto, Texas. I hope I'm saying that right. Hutto, Texas, Hutto, Texas. He's committed to Texas Tech at the moment. He's 6'2", 195 pounds. 3-star guy in the 2024 class. But the reason I think that this is a guy to keep an eye on is because he's from the state of Texas, which is where Will Stein, the new offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach for Oregon, obviously has plenty of ties and connections. So I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon tried to get more involved with Hammond. Like I said, when we were talking about Raiola, you kind of just got to keep your options open. You don't want to go all in on one quarterback, especially if the class overall isn't super deep. But the thing to note with Hammond, he got offered on December 20th. So just shortly after Will Stein got hired by Oregon, it looked like Stein tabbed him as a guy that he wanted to have his eyes on at quarterback in the 2024 class. So the nice thing for Oregon when it comes to quarterback recruiting is that they already have a couple pieces in place to, market to the quarterback, for lack of a better word, right? You have Tyser Denmark, Jordan Anderson, 2 of the best wide receivers in the 2024 class from Philadelphia and Inglewood, respectively. And then you also have Fox Crater, who's an offensive tackle who is drawing a ton of attention on the recruiting trail. He's got a lot of big visits planned, but he was just in Eugene this past weekend, got to meet Alik Terry, the new offensive line coach, and they're trying to build those relationships. But, top programs still going after Fox Crater. But case in point, Oregon has some good stuff to sell them already. I think Will Stein's an up-and-coming coach, obviously, that has a lot of guys excited. So it's going to be interesting. We got to see how Oregon can manage recruiting the quarterback position. When do they get that quarterback commit in the fold? This is the time when you do your heavy lifting. Spring, summer months, by the time the season comes around, if all of it goes according to plan for Oregon, they're going to have that 2024 class, for the most part, wrapped up with some of those elite top-tier guys, the ones that they're willing to wait on in the 2024 recruiting class. So, things are going well right now, but other schools are starting to get quarterback commitments. And, I don't think we'll see maybe as much of a domino effect with the top guys as we did last class with Arch and Nico. Dante Moore was obviously a later commitment, committed to Oregon in July before flipping things to UCLA down the stretch. So other schools are getting quarterback commits, and the clock's ticking a little bit. We know how important it is to get a quarterback early, build your class around that guy. That's kind of the face of your class more often than not. So Oregon's going to look for an elite guy, but there aren't as many elite options. Malachi Nelson was another guy in 23. So this class is not as deep at the quarterback position from top to bottom as 2023, and quarterback remains a major priority for Oregon in the 2024 recruiting class. All right, now we're going to be starting off talking about Kamar Matuti. He is, I realized when I was talking to him the other night that I wasn't pronouncing it right. It's not Mathuti, it's Kamar Matuti. He's from Valley Village, California at Campbell Hall High School, and he's the first player that we're going to be spotlighting on today's episode of the podcast. So I have his highlights up on the screen on YouTube, so you guys can check that out if you guys are watching on YouTube. But this is an absolutely huge target for Oregon on the recruiting trail. He's a top linebacker target in the 2024 class. The Ducks and Carlos Lachlan actually extended the offer in January, but this is a guy who is super athletic and really versatile. I think the best stat that I think, or the best note that I can think of with Kamar Matuti is this is a guy who led his league, his high school league, in tackles and in rushing. Who does that? That's absolutely insane. Kamar Matuti leading Campbell Hall in numerous categories, obviously tackles and rushing. So this is a guy that can do it all, and I think he's a guy that Oregon has identified as a major priority on the recruiting trail in this 2024 class, because you got to think the inside linebacker spot is an absolute priority for the Ducks with some of their mainstays like Noah Sewell moving on to the NFL. And then we don't know how long Justin Jacobs, Jeffrey Bassa are going to be at Oregon. Got to keep an eye on for those guys. But Kamar Matuti took his first trip out to Oregon over the weekend, and it did not disappoint. It was a huge trip for Kamar Matuti. He was talking about how he wanted to get up there sooner, but he just had to find an open weekend for him and his father to make it up there. I asked him what a highlight was for this trip, and he said, man, what wasn't a highlight? That kind of gives you a sense of just how impressed Kamar Matuti was when he got to take the trip to Oregon. I know he told me when he got offered by the Ducks, he was almost borderline running around the hallways of his high school because he was just that excited. But the big updates for Kamar Matuti is that it looks like his official visit schedule was starting to come into focus just a little bit. He talked about wanting to lock in officials to Oregon as well as Michigan. Michigan was one of those big schools that came in to offer after the Ducks offered. You also have Utah and Nebraska as some of those big schools that came in with offers. So this is a guy who's not super highly rated on the recruiting trail. I think he's a 4-star, but he's not as highly rated as I think he's going to be. So I know some fans maybe look at recruits and they don't see the big, rankings and ratings, but this is a guy, Kamar Matuti, I think, who's going to see his stock skyrocket on the recruiting trail. I don't know exactly what kind of neighborhood we're talking about, but he's a guy that I think is only going to get more and more interest as things unfold and as we get closer to his senior season. During his time in Eugene, getting into more of the visit breakdown with Kamar Matuti, you have time spent with Brian Michalowski, who's the new inside linebackers coach. He really liked his detailed approach, talking about going into those meetings, sitting in on the player meetings, seeing the plans that he had, the plays that he had printed out for players before the meetings, just really ready to coach and wants to make sure that everybody is on the same page and ready to go. So he loved the detailed approach from Brian Michalowski, as well as just the whole visit. This whole visit, every part of the day was planned out. That's how Oregon does it, has done it in the past, and will continue to do it. But Michalowski was a guy he got to spend time with. Tosh Lapoy, another guy. Dan Lanning, another guy he got to spend time with. Rashad Wadood. I can't overstate how much of an asset Rashad Wadood is for this Oregon recruiting staff. He was named, I believe, by Rivals' Adam Gorney as one of the best up-and-coming recruiters in the Pac-12, and he played a huge role in Oregon, landing Dalen Austin from Long Beach Poly, Roderick Pleasant from Junipero Serra and Gardena. Mateo Uyangalele is another guy from Southern California. Maybe Wadood didn't have as much of a hand in that recruitment from what I can recall, but he's huge in their Southern California pipeline. And Kamar Matuti out of the Hollywood area he's a major guy for the Ducks. So really, really good that they were able to get him on campus. And I believe that they have moved into the driver's seat in his recruitment. I kind of already felt good about where Oregon stood before this visit, but after talking to Kamar following the visit, I think that Oregon absolutely leads for Kamar Matuti in his recruitment. Looking at some other updates that come from this visit, he did say that he was changing up his decision timeline. He was going to initially go during the early signing period. Now he's trying to move things up and commit probably during the summer before his senior season. And he's a guy that's looking to enroll early, so he's kind of working some things out with his parents, with his school, with his teachers and counselors to try to take some more classes this summer so that he can enroll early. A number of schools have been, giving chase in this recruitment for Kamar Matuti, hearing the most from Oregon, Washington, Arizona State, and Utah. He even threw in that he was hearing from Oklahoma a bit, but they have not offered just yet. So keep an eye out for Oklahoma. Remember, this is a guy I told you that I think will see his recruiting stock continue to rise. What's up next for Matuti now that he's visited Oregon? It looks like he only has one trip locked in. That's to Washington, April 2nd through 4th. But he also mentioned wanting to get out to a couple of other schools, talked about Michigan, Utah, Arizona, maybe Cal, and then also Nebraska as a school that he wants to see. So I just want to tell you guys, this is a major, major priority for Dan Lanning and the Ducks on the recruiting trail. And the love is definitely mutual. Kamar Matuti loves Oregon, loves the fit, loves, just the overall fit from the program, as well as, the major and kind of just what he's looking for at his school of choice. I think Oregon's checking every box, and I love where the Ducks stand in their pursuit of Campbell Hall linebacker Kamar Matuti. The next guy that we're talking about is Oregon safety target Jalen McLean. Jalen McLean is another elite defensive back that the Ducks are going after here in the 2024 recruiting class. He's coming out of West Orange, New Jersey, Seton Hall Prep. This is a dude. Just to kind of get you guys up to speed. Like I said, he's coming out of the Northeast, not necessarily an area that Oregon has recruited too heavily in the past. But, if there's guys out there, this staff wants to find them. So just to give some more background on Jalen McLean, he's down to 10 schools right now, working from a top 10 that includes Notre Dame, USC, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan, Michigan State, in-state Rutgers, Stanford, Tennessee, and Georgia. So Oregon is going up against some of the best schools in college football, and it's not going to be an easy recruitment for them to win. But I think that they're in an awesome spot here, getting him out on campus. I think that goes a long way, especially with a guy who's so far away, on the other side of the country. If you can get him out to Eugene, I think that really kind of is an opportunity for them to really just make that interest that much more tangible, show him what it's really like, obviously put faces to names after a lot of conversations over the phone. But just kind of getting into more of this visit recap from Jalen McLean, he talked about how he really liked practice, liked the tempo of it, and really liked kind of just how the Ducks were organized, how they were running things. Talked about, you go and you learn the content, you learn the scheme, and then you go out on the field and you drill it. And everybody was locked in, no dilly-dallying. They were just really, focused and loved the energy. He said that he felt that the love was genuine with this Oregon staff, and that distance isn't that big of a deal, even though it would be, going across the country to play his college football. Fortunately for the Ducks, his mom was able to go on the trip with him, and he told me that, she knows that he would be in good hands if he were to go to Oregon. And this is another guy, like we see so often with Oregon, is that there's so many guys that are working on recruiting a single player. It's never just one player. You have Cameron Aragi, who is a big name for Oregon on the recruiting trail. He's an analyst, a defensive analyst, working with the safeties at Oregon. You have Dan Lanning involved here. You have Tosh Lapoy here that he got to spend time with. Chris Hampton, the new safeties coach and co-defensive coordinator. He's made these guys a big priority. And another thing that stands out to McLean about Oregon is that Oregon's chasing a national championship. And he was telling me, they've had good recruiting classes, but they think that with his play style and with his grit that he can be kind of a big piece of the puzzle if he is to go to Oregon in terms of helping them get to that national championship. And if you've been watching Oregon football, you don't need me to tell you that the secondary play has been absolutely lacking these past couple of years. Even heading into 2023, they had a lot of veterans coming back, but they still went out into the portal, got Evan Williams, got Tysheem Johnson to bolster that depth. Jamal Hill might be moving to inside linebacker. So the secondary is definitely an area that still needs some more work for Oregon in this 2024 recruiting class, without a doubt. One of the quotes that really stood out to me about Jalen McLean, from Jalen McLean, when I was talking to him, he was saying, quote, "The O has so much power and benefits you so much more than just football." So we're talking about the power of branding. We've heard it from coaches in the past at Oregon. That O allows you to go into any room in the country and they know who you are. They know who you're talking about. They know where you're coming from. So we know that Oregon has a massive brand. And it sounds like that part of it is definitely resonating with Jalen McLean. Looking more at the big picture, I think that it's looking like it's pretty likely that Oregon's going to get an official visit from Jalen McLean. I know that what they're hoping to do is get him back out for an unofficial and then an official. So another unofficial, an official, and then hopefully trying to seal the deal. We know that Oregon likes to line up those official visits pretty close to a guy's commitment date. And they put themselves in an awesome spot with Jalen McLean after hosting him on a really good visit. You can see him here also, chasing guys down with some special teams value. This guy's got wheels. And how many times have we seen, Oregon safeties kind of getting burned because they weren't fast enough? You've got to have guys that can run at that safety spot, and Jalen McLean can definitely do that. Looking at the big picture, obviously Oregon isn't the only school involved. We went through the top 10. But McLean told me that he's hearing the most from Oregon, Penn State, Michigan State, USC, Michigan, Rutgers, and Notre Dame as well. However, I can tell you that Penn State is kind of who Oregon thinks is their main competition right now in this pursuit of Jalen McLean, one of the best safeties in the country. Penn State has also offered his brother, so I know that was something that he kind of viewed as an appeal. We've seen it a bunch of times, right? Guys getting recruited, and then their brother plays, or their cousin plays, and they're also getting offered. Schools will just do what they can to try to kind of sweeten the deal and look more appealing in these eyes of the recruits. So keep an eye out and see what's going on the recruiting trail there with Jalen McLean. He said that he's going to be making it back out to Penn State this upcoming weekend, but there's no other visits planned right now for Jalen McLean. He said he kind of just likes to do the visits, 1 week ahead of time. So Penn State is definitely the main school to watch here in pursuit of Jalen McLean. But Chris Hampton and the Ducks did a great job with a strong visit for the talented safety out of New Jersey. Moving right along to our next guy, we got two more guys we're talking about here on the Ducks Dish podcast. We're talking about Texas offensive lineman Bennett Warren. Bennett Warren is a towering 6'8", 320 pounds, coming out of Fort Bend Christian Academy in Sugar Land, Texas. Talk about a highly coveted recruit. He's got nearly 30 reported offers on the recruiting trail. We're seeing him here on the film as a right tackle, and he looks like he's an obvious priority early on for Alik Terry after joining the Oregon staff in February. And it's funny, so Bennett Warren visited Oregon over this past weekend. That's why I'm talking about him on this episode of the podcast. But this was a visit that was pretty spur of the moment, matter of fact. His mom had a job interview in Portland, and they kind of just went out to Portland. Him and his dad got a rental car, and they said, hey, can we come hang out at Oregon for a little bit? So it really worked out that Oregon was able to get him on campus, and then his mom was also able to come over from what I've seen in the visit pictures and also spend some time at the University of Oregon on that visit. But the big update that we got from Bennett Warren's visit to Oregon, it was his first time out to Eugene, and he liked it so much that he quickly locked in an official visit with the Ducks for June 23rd through 25th. And he also has an official visit scheduled to Oklahoma. That also comes in June. So 2 of the 5 official visits kind of coming into focus for Bennett Warren. So this is really good that Oregon's able to continue working in the state of Texas. They also hosted Blake Frazier out of Austin, Texas. He and Bennett Warren were the 2 main offensive linemen that were on campus for Oregon. Blake Frazier is another big target for Oregon in the 2024 class. I believe he's getting crystal ball to Michigan now. He went to Michigan right after visiting Oregon. So looks like the Wolverines could be a major target, a major school to watch for Blake Frazier. But back to Bennett Warren. It's really important for the Ducks to continue working in the state of Texas. It's a state that's been really kind to them in the past. 6 signees from the 2023 class out of the state of Texas. So we know that this coaching staff has extensive roots in the Lone Star State. You also obviously have Will Stein, you have Tyler Dean, you have Antonio Parks, who just got added to the staff as an offensive analyst. He's going to be big in this recruitment, or at any recruitment for Oregon that's in Texas and Louisiana, from what I'm told. But this was a big visit for Bennett Warren because he was able to meet Alik Terry, get to see that practice. He told me that the camaraderie around that Oregon team, around the offensive line, was really big for him, seeing that he got to actually be brought into the huddle at the end of practice for Oregon and just kind of feel like one of the guys, right? So I think that was really big, that they were able to really put their best foot forward with Bennett Warren. He's talking about how he really liked Alik Terry. I almost said Khalil Tate, excuse me. He really likes Alik Terry's energy that he brings. And he's not, scared away by the fact that he's young, because he's like, he's got some really good coaching experience. He's been with the Vikings. He's been at Hawaii, and he's had some couple places around the country. So he's just a fun person to be around, is what he'd say. And watching practice was his favorite part. So I asked him, one of my favorite questions to ask recruits now is what kind of message Oregon is sending. And he said the message that they sent is, quote, that the Ducks are here to stay. The Ducks are there to stay, that they're there to make their statement as being one of my favorite all-time schools. So it looks like Oregon's in an awesome spot here, but they're not alone in their pursuit of the massive offensive lineman out of Texas. Schools like Oregon, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, FSU, and LSU are all schools that he's hearing from the most right now in his recruitment. And he's looking to have his recruitment wrapped up with a commitment either before the season, right before the season starts, or maybe about halfway through the season, is what Warren was telling me. So the Ducks are doing a great job trying to really stand out in this pursuit for offensive linemen. I think that they really signed a lot of offensive linemen. I think it was 7 or 8 last year. If you talk about Johnny Cornelius, Junior Angelau from the portal, and then I think they had 5 or 6 guys from the high school or JUCO rankings. Is you just got to keep giving yourself options there. So maybe they don't take as many as they did in 2023, but offensive line is still definitely a priority, I think, on the recruiting trail in the 2024 class, especially given the fact that it's a new era at the offensive line, not only because Alik Terry takes over that group, but because you lose so many veterans from the 2023 season. I think that you just got to continue giving yourself more options there. And it looks like Bennett Warren is a top option for the Ducks on the recruiting trail at the offensive line spot. All right, we got one more guy we're talking about. Next up is Oregon edge target Wyatt Gilmore. Wyatt Gilmore comes out of the state of Minnesota, Rogers Senior High School. He was also on campus for a visit this past weekend, and he's a big target for the Ducks along the edge. During his time at Oregon, he got to spend time mainly with Tony Tuioti. He talked about how, faith and family are really important to Tuioti, and that resonated with him because that is a big part of his core values. You can see his tape here as an edge player, really, really disruptive. I think he's the top player, according to 247 Sports, out of the state of Minnesota. And I think he's the number 32 edge in the country, but 6'4", 250 pounds. Oregon wants to keep adding difference makers along the defensive line of scrimmage. They kind of mainly see him as an edge right now, but depending on how he develops, maybe they see him moving all over the defensive line. But this was a guy that I think is a little bit newer in terms of Oregon offers. But he said that once I got the opportunity to go take a visit, I could not pass it up. So this was big for the Ducks to get him on campus and just kind of get a feel for where he's ultimately at in his recruitment. It doesn't sound like he's a guy that's very close to being finished with his recruitment right now, but he's got a lot of schools that are coming after him. It really feels like it's kind of a Big 10, Big 12 recruitment in terms of schools outside of Oregon. that are going after him. Let me look and see what other schools are involved in Wyatt Gilmore's recruitment as we stand here in March. Let's see who else is in the mix here, who he's hearing from the most. He's hearing the most from Minnesota, Oregon, Miami, Missouri, Oklahoma, a lot, Iowa, Kansas State, Kansas, Purdue, and Wisconsin. So that's like, excuse me, most of the big schools in the Big Ten, aside from Michigan and Ohio State. But he did tell me that he's got trips coming up to Missouri and Oklahoma. Those are the next ones on the docket for him. So the nice thing is that he said that Oregon stood out enough to get a return visit. He doesn't have that scheduled right now, but he said that he probably thinks he's going to go back to Oregon for another visit. And there's one thing that is really setting Oregon apart in their recruitment of Wyatt Gilmore because of how they check a very important box for him. He talked about the most important factor in his recruitment is professional development or is just player development, right? Because he wants to go to the NFL. That's what most of these guys want. And he's saying, between Dan Lanning, Tosh Lapoy, and Tony Tuioti, those are three really high caliber coaches. Obviously, Dan Lanning was at Georgia as their DC, and then Tosh Lapoy spent some time in the NFL. So he loves the coaching pedigree that, can help him develop at the University of Oregon. And he just feels like it's great for him to be successful there because he has guys that are so defensive minded, so many strong defensive minds that's really going to help him on get to his ultimate goal. But as far as, a decision timeline, he says he'll probably take his officials throughout the spring and August and then maybe try to commit towards the end of the summer. So that's what we're seeing a lot of these guys do. So you can imagine why it would be important for Oregon to get him on the field, on campus in spring, kind of get a feel for where he's at, hopefully get a return visit. Maybe that's an official. I think they're in a good spot for that right now. But again, Minnesota, Midwest, not really an area that Oregon recruits too heavily, but you can see Wyatt Gilmore here just being an absolute animal physically off the edge and then also just handling some guys, blocking as well. Got some good change of direction, some good straight line speed. Here he is chasing down a play from like 20 or 30 yards away. So this dude's got a motor without a doubt. But Wyatt Gilmore is another big time prospect that you got to keep an eye on for Oregon here in the class of 2024. All right, so that was the last guy that we had to go through on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. We got through some really good updates. I told you I really feel good about Kamar Matuti and where Oregon stands there in the race for his commitment. But I think just as we kind of go on the rest of the spring, just expect more and more big names to be coming to campus. We got to see what happens with Gary Bryant, the former USC wide receiver who was on campus this past weekend. Where do things stand with him? Is he going to maybe end up being a Duck? We don't know just yet. We've got to make sure we stay tuned into that recruitment. But this is where the heavy lifting is. And I think that Oregon's visit weekends are just going to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger, all culminating with the marquee recruiting event of the year, of the calendar year, the spring game, the Oregon spring game. Going to have a lot of commits coming into town, I bet, and then a lot of top targets. So it's going to be a fun time. Recruiting is always fun to follow in the spring and summer months, and I'm here for all of it. A friendly reminder for you guys, do me a quick favor. Make sure you smash those like and subscribe buttons. That's a tremendous help to support the channel, help us grow, help us get in front of more Duck fans. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking about Oregon recruiting, and then share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans. And don't forget, you can find my latest written content on ducksdigest.com. And let's just keep it going. Let's be great. Let's have an awesome week. Hope everyone's doing well out there. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.